The most expensive thing my mother ever bought me was my ruined credit score, and she used my own money to pay for it. Picture this. You're 32, working double shifts as a nurse to keep your alcoholic mother afloat when you discover she's been living a secret life of luxury funded by credit cards she opened in your name. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is finding out she pawned your dead grandmother's irreplaceable sapphire necklace, a 3-generation family heirloom, for $23.50 to buy drinks for strangers at a bar. I'm Sarah, and I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like. I thought I'd seen the depths of betrayal when I found my mother passed out in her own vomit wearing a designer dress she'd bought with my stolen credit. But standing in Murphy's Pawn and Gold, holding that crumpled receipt like a death certificate for my trust, I realized I'd been naive. The woman who taught me about love had spent 3 years systematically destroying my future, one fraudulent transaction at a time. She'd stolen my identity, my credit, my grandmother's memory, and my ability to believe that family meant safety. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build your revenge on. And I was about to teach my mother that when you play with someone's life, sometimes they play back, only harder. Let me take you back. The apartment was too quiet when I walked in that Tuesday evening. You know that kind of silence that feels wrong, like the air itself is holding its breath? That should have been my first warning. Mom was always playing music, always had the TV chattering in the background, always filling the space with noise to drown out whatever demons were chasing her that day. But tonight, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside our second-floor window. "Mom," I called out, dropping my work bag by the door. My scrubs were still damp with the sweat of another 12-hour shift at the hospital, and all I wanted was a hot shower and whatever leftovers were hiding in the fridge. "Mom, you here?" No answer. I found her passed out on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks like war paint, and there were 3 empty wine bottles on the coffee table. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way she'd arranged herself, almost posed, like she wanted me to find her this way, like she wanted me to see the destruction. That's when I noticed the jewelry box. It was sitting open on the kitchen counter, its pink velvet interior exposed like an open wound. My grandmother's jewelry box, the one Mom had given me after the funeral 6 months ago, promising me that Grandma Rose would have wanted me to have her things. I walked over slowly, my heart starting to race. The box was nearly empty. Grandma's wedding ring was gone. Her pearl earrings vanished. And the sapphire necklace, the one she'd worn to every family gathering, every birthday, every Christmas morning, it wasn't there. My hands were shaking as I rifled through the few remaining pieces. A broken bracelet, a pair of cheap earrings I didn't recognize, and at the bottom, like a slap across the face, a pawn shop receipt, dated that morning. Murphy's Pawn and Gold. Various jewelry items. Total, $247.50. I stared at that receipt until the numbers blurred. $247. That's what my grandmother's lifetime of memories was worth to my mother. Less than what she'd spend on a weekend at the casino. She's not sleeping, you know. I spun around. Mom was sitting up on the couch now, watching me with bloodshot eyes that held no trace of shame. "She's dead, Sarah. Dead people don't need jewelry." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Those weren't just pieces of jewelry, Mom. They were sitting in a box, collecting dust. At least now they're doing some good. Some good? I held up the receipt. "You sold Grandma's sapphire necklace for $23? $23.50, she corrected, like the extra 50 cents made it better. And I didn't sell just that. There was other stuff, too." Other stuff? My voice cracked. That was her wedding set. Those pearls were from her mother. The sapphire necklace was what, Sarah? Going to bring her back? You think hoarding dead people's jewelry is going to make you feel better about not visiting her enough when she was alive? The words hit their target with surgical precision. She knew exactly where to aim. I had been working double shifts those last few months, picking up extra hours to pay for her rehab, the rehab she'd walked out of after 6 days because they didn't understand her unique situation. I visited her every week, I whispered. Every week wasn't enough, was it? She died alone, Sarah, in that nursing home you stuck her in. I felt something break inside my chest. I stuck her in? I was the only one taking care of her. You were too busy getting drunk to even remember her birthday. Don't lecture me about my own mother. She wasn't just your mother. She was my grandmother, and that necklace was mine. You gave it to me. Mom laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I gave you a lot of things. Doesn't mean I can't take them back. I stared at her. This woman who had raised me, who had sung me lullabies and made me Halloween costumes and taught me how to braid my hair. When had she become this stranger? When had her eyes become so cold? "Where's the money?" I asked quietly. "What money?" "The money from pawning my grandmother's jewelry. Where is it?" She looked away. "That's not your concern." But I could see the guilt in her posture, the way her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. I walked to her purse, sitting on the kitchen counter, and before she could stop me, I opened it. Empty. Completely empty, except for a handful of loose change and a receipt from O'Malley's bar dated that afternoon.
"You spent it all already?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "All of it? In one day?" "I had debts to pay." "Debts to who? Your bartender?" She didn't answer, but the flesh creeping up her neck told me everything I needed to know. She'd sold my inheritance to buy drinks for herself and probably half the bar. She'd traded away 3 generations of memories for one night of artificial happiness. I looked at the receipt again, memorizing the address. Murphy's Pawn and Gold, 1247 Cedar Street. "I'm going to get them back," I said quietly. "Good luck with that. They don't do returns." "Then I'll buy them back." "With what money?" She laughed again. "You can barely afford this apartment." She was right, and we both knew it. Between my student loans and supporting both of us, I was living paycheck to paycheck. But as I stood there, holding that receipt, looking at this woman who had taught me about love and then shown me its opposite, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to get my grandmother's necklace back, no matter what it cost, no matter what I had to do. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandma Rose's face the last time I'd visited her. She'd been wearing that sapphire necklace, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern of the chain as she told me stories about her mother and her mother's mother, and the day my grandfather had proposed with that ring that was now sitting in some stranger's display case. "Promise me something, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice paper-thin but her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. "Promise me you'll remember that we're more than just the sum of our mistakes. We're the love we leave behind." I'd promised, and now I was failing her. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and drove to Murphy's Pawn and Gold. It wouldn't open for another 4 hours, but I needed to see the place, to understand what I was up against. The building was squat and brick with barred windows and a neon sign that flickered between open and purr, like it couldn't make up its mind. I sat in my car across the street drinking gas station coffee and watching the early morning joggers pass by, wondering how many of them had family heirlooms sitting in that building, wondering how many of them would do what I was about to do. When the shop finally opened, I was the first customer through the door. The owner was exactly what you'd expect from a pawn shop. A heavy-sized man with suspicious eyes and arms covered in tattoos that looked like they'd been done in someone's kitchen. His name tag read Murphy in block letters. "Help you?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "I'm looking for some jewelry that might have been brought in yesterday. A sapphire necklace, some rings, pearl earrings."
Now he looked at me. Buyin' or claimin'? I want to buy back some pieces that belong to my family. He studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. Jewelry case is over there. If you see something you like, we'll talk price. The case was larger than I had expected, filled with hundreds of pieces that each represented someone's desperation. Engagement rings from failed marriages, watches from men who'd run out of time. And there, in the third row, nestled between a gaudy gold bracelet and a class ring, was my grandmother's sapphire necklace. It looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. The sapphire was the size of a teardrop, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the fluorescent light like captured stars. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, and so familiar that I had to grip the counter to keep from crying. "That one," I said, pointing. "How much?" Murphy walked over and squinted at the necklace. "Nice piece. Real sapphire, good clarity. The diamonds are small but decent quality." He paused for effect. $250. $250? My voice cracked. "But you only paid—" "I paid what I paid. Now I'm selling for what it's worth. Supply and demand, sweetheart." I wanted to argue, to explain that this wasn't just a transaction, that this necklace had been worn by women who lived through wars and depressions and heartbreaks that would have destroyed lesser people. But Murphy wasn't interested in stories. He was interested in profit. "I'll need some time to get the money together," I said. "Sure thing. I'll hold it for 24 hours. After that, it goes back in the case for anyone to buy." 24 hours. I had less than a day to come up with $250 I didn't have. I spent the rest of the morning calling banks trying to get a personal loan. My credit was decent, but not decent enough for an unsecured loan without a cosigner. I called my cousin Jenny, the only other family member who might understand what this meant, but she was going through her own divorce and barely making ends meet. By afternoon, I was desperate enough to consider things I'd never thought I'd consider. Payday loans with interest rates that would cripple me for months, borrowing against my car, selling plasma. That's when I found my mother's purse again. I don't know what made me look through it more carefully this time. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the way she'd passed out again on the couch, surrounded by fresh bottles she'd somehow acquired despite claiming she was broke. But as I searched through the zippered compartments, I found something that made my blood run cold. Credit cards. 5 of them. All in my name. I stared at the plastic rectangles, my hands trembling. When had she gotten these? How had she gotten these? My name was embossed on each one in neat silver letters, Sarah Marie Collins. But I'd never applied for any of them, never signed for them, never even seen them before. With shaking fingers, I pulled out my phone and called the customer service number on the back of the first card. After navigating through the automated system, I finally reached a human being. "I need to check the balance and recent activity on this account," I said. "You'll need to verify your identity first." I answered the security questions, my birthday, my social security number, my mother's maiden name. It was disturbingly easy.
Your current balance is $2,847, with available credit of $152, the representative said cheerfully. Your last payment was received on the 15th of last month. What was the payment amount? $200. My stomach dropped. Can you tell me about recent charges? Certainly. Let me pull up your recent activity. There was a pause. You have several charges from yesterday. O'Malley's Bar, $87. City Cab Company, $15. Another charge at O'Malley's for $93. And one from Murphy's Pawn and Gold for $8. Murphy's Pawn and Gold?
My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. Yes, ma'am. $8.50. She'd used my own credit card to pay the storage fee for my grandmother's jewelry. She'd maxed out credit cards in my name to fund her drinking, and then she'd used my credit to keep my own inheritance locked away from me. I hung up and checked the other cards. They told the same story. Maxed out limits. Minimum payments made just often enough to keep the accounts open. Years of charges at bars, liquor stores, casinos. My credit was ruined, and I'd never even known these accounts existed. I looked at my mother, passed out on the couch, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about getting Grandma's necklace back anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure she understood that stealing someone's identity, stealing someone's memories, stealing someone's future, it all had consequences. I picked up the first credit card. Ironically, it was the one with the highest limit and the smallest balance, and slipped it into my wallet. If she wanted to play games with my credit, then we'd play games with my credit. But this time, I'd be the one making the rules. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, 3 cups of coffee, and a growing pile of evidence that painted a picture of systematic financial abuse that had been going on for over 3 years. The credit card statements told a story that made me sick to my stomach. My mother had been opening accounts in my name since I'd first started working at the hospital, probably using the pre-approved offers that came in the mail. She'd been careful about it too, making minimum payments to keep the accounts active, spreading the charges across multiple cards so no single balance looked catastrophic. But together they painted a picture of someone who'd been living a double life at my expense. Card number 1, $4,500 limit, maxed out. Mostly bars and restaurants with a few cash advances that had been immediately spent at the casino 20 minutes from our apartment. Card number 2, $3,000 limit, maxed out. More of the same, plus some interesting charges at high-end department stores. Apparently, while I was wearing scrubs and eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, she'd been buying designer purses. Card number 3, $2,500 limit, maxed out. This one hurt the most because it showed charges at the nursing home where Grandma had spent her final months. She'd been using my credit to pay for things like premium cable and private nursing services while telling me we couldn't afford them, making me feel guilty for not being able to give Grandma more comfort in her final days. Cards 4 and 5 told similar stories. In total, she'd stolen nearly $15,000 from my future, one transaction at a time. But it was the dates that really got to me. The timeline that showed she'd been planning this systematically. The first card had been opened the same week I'd gotten my first real paycheck as a registered nurse. She'd celebrated my success by figuring out how to profit from it. I printed everything, every statement, every transaction, every bit of evidence that showed the careful, calculated way she'd been destroying my financial future. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. At 7 a.m., I called in sick to work. I never called in sick. In 3 years at the hospital, I'd used maybe 5 sick days total. But today, I had more important business to attend to. I drove back to Murphy's and Pawn and Gold, but this time I wasn't going as a victim. I was going as someone who understood exactly how the game was played. Murphy was behind the counter again, reading the same newspaper. He looked up when I walked in, probably expecting me to beg for more time or try to negotiate a payment plan. Instead, I placed one of my mother's credit cards on the counter. "I'd like to buy back some jewelry," I said calmly. "The sapphire necklace we discussed yesterday. Plus, I want to see what else you might have from the same seller." His eyebrows went up slightly. "You came up with the money?" "I came up with a solution." He ran the card first, checking my credit limit. I knew what he'd find. Despite being nearly maxed out, this particular card still had about $400 available, more than enough for what I needed. The necklace is still $250. You mentioned other pieces. Everything that came in yesterday from the same seller. I want to buy it all back. Murphy disappeared into the back room and returned with a small tray. My grandmother's wedding ring, her pearl earrings, a small silver locket I remembered from childhood, and a few other pieces I didn't recognize, but that must have meant something to someone once upon a time. The whole lot, he said, will run you $380. I did the math quickly. It would leave me about $20 on that card, but it would be worth it. Deal. As Murphy processed the transaction, I asked the question I'd been rehearsing all morning. The person who brought these in yesterday, do you remember what they looked like? Lady in her 50s, brown hair going gray, looked like she'd been drinking. Why? Just curious. Family stuff, you know how it is. Yeah, I know. Happens more than you'd think. Kids stealing from parents, parents stealing from kids. Makes you wonder what the world's coming to. I signed the receipt and watched him bag up my grandmother's jewelry. As he handed me the bag, he said something that would stick with me for weeks. You know, most people who come in here buying back family jewelry, they're angry, hurt. But you... He studied my face. You look like you're planning something. He wasn't wrong. I spent the rest of the morning researching identity theft laws. What I found was both encouraging and terrifying. What my mother had done was felony fraud, punishable by significant jail time and fines. But proving it would mean destroying what was left of our relationship and potentially ruining her life. The question was, did she deserve it? I thought about the years of lies, the way she looked me in the eye and complained about being broke while wearing clothes she'd bought with my stolen credit, the way she let me work double shifts to pay for her rehab while secretly funding her drinking with my money, the casual cruelty of selling grandma's jewelry and then mocking me for caring about it. Yeah, she deserved it. But I wasn't going to just report her to the police and wash my hands of it. That would be too simple, too clean. She taught me that actions have consequences, that every choice you make ripples out and affects other people. It was time for her to learn that lesson firsthand. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Phase 1, recovery, complete. Phase 2, documentation, in progress. Phase 3, education, pending. This wasn't just about getting my grandmother's jewelry back anymore. This was about teaching my mother that you can't build your happiness on someone else's destruction without eventually facing the bill. And thanks to her own lessons in creative financing, I knew exactly how to make sure she paid it in full. When I walked into the apartment that evening, my mother was exactly where I'd left her that morning, passed out on the couch, but with fresh bottles around her that hadn't been there before. Somehow, despite claiming to be broke, despite spending my stolen money at the bar yesterday, she'd managed to acquire more alcohol. I stood there for a moment, studying her face in the dim light filtering through our grimy windows. When I was little, I used to think she was the most beautiful woman in the world. She had this laugh that could fill a room and make everyone in it feel like they were part of something special. She used to sing while she cooked, dance around the kitchen while waiting for water to boil, tell me stories about princesses who saved themselves and dragons who just needed someone to understand them. When had that woman died? And why had no one told me about the funeral? I placed the small bag from Murphy's Pawn and Gold on the coffee table next to her empty bottles and sat down in the chair across from her. Then I waited. It took 20 minutes for her to wake up, and when she did, her eyes immediately found the bag. "What's that? Why don't you open it and see?" She sat up slowly, wincing as her body protested the movement. Her hand shook as she reached for the bag, and for just a moment, I felt a stab of sympathy. She looked so fragile, so broken. Then I remembered the credit card statements, and the sympathy evaporated. She opened the bag and froze. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been fear. "How did you—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. "How did I afford it?" I finished for her. "How did your broke daughter manage to come up with almost $400 in a single day?" "Sarah, Let me guess. You're sorry? You were desperate? You'll pay me back? You didn't think I'd find out. Which part of that speech were you planning to start with?" She looked down at the jewelry in her lap. Grandma's sapphire necklace seemed to glow in the lamplight, and I saw her fingers trace the chain exactly the way Grandma used to do. "I was going to get them back," she whispered. "When?" "I don't know. Someday, when things got better." "With what money, Mom? The money you don't have? The money you spend at O'Malley's every night? Or maybe with the money you've been stealing from me for the past 3 years?" Her head snapped up. "I haven't been stealing." I pulled out the stack of printed credit card statements and dropped them on the coffee table. The papers fanned out between us like a deck of cards, each one showing her name and my financial ruin. Capital One, Chase, Discover, Bank of America, Citi. I picked up each statement as I named them. 5 credit cards in my name that I never applied for. Nearly $15,000 in debt that I never created. And the most interesting part? Some of these charges go back 3 years. 3 years, Mom. She was staring at the papers like they might burst into flames. You've been planning this since I graduated nursing school. All those times you complained about money, all those times you made me feel guilty for not being able to help more, you were already helping yourself to my credit. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. Explain how charging $800 at the casino is helping our family. Explain how buying designer purses while I eat ramen noodles for dinner is somehow for my benefit. I was going to pay it back. When, Mom? I stood up, pacing to the window. When were you going to pay back $15,000? You can't even keep a job for more than a month. You spend every penny you get on alcohol or gambling or whatever other vice is calling your name that day. When exactly were you planning to pay me back? She started and stopped several times, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I didn't mean for it to get so bad." "But you meant for it to happen. You meant to steal from me. You just didn't mean to get caught." I turned back to face her, and I was surprised by what I saw. She wasn't angry or defensive or even particularly ashamed. She looked relieved, like finally being caught was somehow easier than keeping the secret. "I'm sick, Sarah. I know that doesn't excuse like dying, but I'm sick. And when you're sick like I am, you don't make good choices." "Don't." My voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't you dare try to make this about your addiction. Millions of people struggle with alcohol without stealing their children's identities. This isn't about being sick. This is about being selfish. That's not. You want to know what's sick?" I grabbed one of the statements. This charge for premium cable at Grandma's nursing home? I spent months feeling guilty because I couldn't afford to get her the extra channels, couldn't pay for the private nurses you said she needed. I worked double shifts until I was ready to collapse, and the whole time, you were already paying for those things with my stolen money. You let me torture myself with guilt while you knew the truth. Her face crumpled. I wanted to help her. You wanted to look like the good daughter without paying the price. You wanted the credit without the cost, just like everything else in your life. I sat back down, my anger replaced by something colder and more focused. But here's the thing, Mom. I figured out how you've been doing this, and that means I figured out how to undo it. Every card you opened, every dollar you stole, every lie you told, I can trace it all. I can prove it all. She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. So you're going to fix it? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Oh, I'm going to fix it, just not the way you think. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in my entire adult life. I called my mother's bluff. She was still sleeping when I left for work, but I'd made sure to leave a little present on the kitchen table. Printed copies of all her fraudulent credit card applications, along with the note that simply read, "We need to talk when I get home. S." I spent my shift at the hospital thinking about consequences. Working in healthcare teaches you a lot about cause and effect. You see what happens when people ignore warning signs, when they make bad choices, when they refuse to take responsibility for their actions. Every day, I treated patients whose problems could have been avoided if they'd just been honest with themselves sooner. My mother had spent years avoiding consequences. It was time for her to meet them. When I got home that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of her. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked defeated, empty. "How long have you known?" she asked without looking up. "I figured it out 3 days ago, but I've been feeling the effects for 3 years. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I did a job and pay it all back and you'd never have to know. But you never got a job, you never paid anything back, and you kept spending." I know. I sat down across from her, studying her face. 3 days ago, I was angry enough to want to destroy her completely. But now, seeing her broken like this, I felt something more complicated. Not forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "Do you know what you've cost me?" I asked quietly. "The money. Not just the money. Do you know what my credit score is right now? Do you know what happens when you try to rent an apartment with a credit score of 500? Do you know what it's like to get turned down for a car loan because you've been financially irresponsible when you've never missed a payment on anything in your life?" She was crying again now, silent tears that dripped on the papers. "I was going to buy a house. I've been saving for a down payment for 2 years. But now I can't even qualify for a mortgage because of choices you made that I didn't even know about." "I'm sorry." Sorry doesn't fix my credit. Sorry doesn't give me back the interest I'm going to pay on these cards. Sorry doesn't undo 3 years of lies. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table between us. I could call the police right now. Identity theft is a federal crime. You could go to prison. Her face went white. "Sarah, please." but I'm not going to. Do you know why? She shook her head. Because I don't want to destroy you. I want to save you. And maybe, if we do this right, we can save us, too. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. I've spent the last 3 days figuring out exactly how deep this goes. The total damage is $14,784 across 5 cards. The minimum monthly payments totaled $387. If we pay minimums, it'll take 27 years to pay off and cost us over $35,000 in interest. Us? You're going to pay every penny back, I said firmly. But you're going to do it the right way, with my help. I opened the folder and spread out the papers I'd prepared. Option 1, I report the fraud to the police and the credit card companies. You go to jail, I get the debt removed from my credit, and we never speak again. She flinched. Option 2, you agree to my terms. You get treatment for your alcohol problem, real treatment, not just the detox program you walked out of. You get a job and maintain it for at least 6 months. Then you turn over every penny of income beyond basic necessities to pay down these debts. And you submit to random drug and alcohol testing for the next 3 years. And if I do all that? If you do all that, I won't press charges. Your debt becomes our debt, and we pay it off together. You get a chance to rebuild your life instead of spending it in prison. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the papers. Finally, she looked up at me. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough? Then you'll face the consequences of that choice too. But at least you'll have had the chance. I slid a contract across the table, something I'd had a lawyer friend help me draft. This makes it official. You sign this and you're agreeing to the terms. You break the terms and I automatically file all the fraud reports I've already prepared. She picked up the contract with shaking hands, reading through it slowly. I'd been thorough. Weekly check-ins, proof of employment, proof of treatment attendance, bank statements showing where every dollar was going. This is like parole. It's exactly like parole, because this is your crime and this is your chance to make it right.
She was quiet again, and I could see her weighing her options: prison and certain ruin, or accountability and possible redemption. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the small jewelry bag. I opened it and removed my grandmother's sapphire necklace, holding it up so it caught the light. This stays with me, forever. If you ever touch anything that belongs to me again, ever, the deal is off. I understand. Do you? Do you really? Because 3 years ago, you looked me in the eye and promised you'd never lie to me again after I caught you drinking and driving. And then you spent the next 3 years systematically stealing my identity while I trusted you. So forgive me if I need more than just your word. She took a shaky breath and picked up the pen I'd placed beside the contract. If I sign this, will you forgive me? I thought about that question for a long moment. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'll give you the chance to earn it. She signed her name at the bottom of the contract, and I witnessed it with my signature. For the first time in 3 days, I felt like I could breathe again. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. 3 weeks after my mother signed the contract, I discovered that revenge was more complicated than I expected. She'd actually followed through on her commitments. She'd enrolled in a 90-day inpatient program at a treatment center across town, paid for with the last available credit on one of the cards she'd maxed out. She'd given me access to her bank account, Not that there was much to access, and she'd started attending AA meetings 3 times a week. The hardest part, though, was watching her go through withdrawal. I visited her in treatment every Saturday, sitting in a sterile conference room while she told me about her day, her struggles, her realizations about how badly she'd hurt me. She looked smaller somehow, like the absence of alcohol had deflated her. But she also looked clearer, more present. I remember things now, she told me during our 4th visit. Things I'd forgotten, like your first day of nursing school, how proud you looked in your scrubs. I was so drunk that night that I barely remember congratulating you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I remember that night too. I'd come home excited to share my day with her, but she'd been passed out by 7 p.m. I'd celebrated alone with leftover pizza and a movie I'd seen 3 times already. I want to make a list, she continued, of all the things I stole from you. Not just the money, the moments, the memories, the trust. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because I need to understand the full scope of what I've done, and you need to know that I understand it too. She pulled out a notebook, one of those composition books we used to buy for my school supplies. The pages were covered with her handwriting, dates and amounts and descriptions that painted a picture of systematic betrayal that was somehow even worse when organized chronologically. October 15th, 2021. Applied for Capital One card using Sarah's information. First charge, $67 at O'Malley's. I told myself it was just this once, just to get through a rough patch. Mom, stop. December 3rd, 2021. Used card to pay rent because I'd spent the rent money gambling. Told the landlord he'd agreed to wait until after Christmas. You don't have to read the whole thing. But she kept going, her voice getting steadier as she continued. Each entry was a small betrayal, a tiny theft that had accumulated into something monstrous. And what struck me wasn't just the money, it was the lies, the elaborate stories she'd constructed to explain away problems that she had created with my stolen credit. I told myself I was protecting you, she said when she finally reached the end. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal, I convinced myself it was somehow for your own good, that if you knew how bad things really were, it would hurt you more than the lies did. But that wasn't your choice to make. No, it wasn't. She closed the notebook. There's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. My stomach clenched. After everything we discovered, what else could there possibly be? The nursing home. When Grandma was dying. You remember how you wanted to move her to that private facility across town? The one with the better care? I remember. I'd researched it for weeks, called them multiple times, even filled out the application. But the cost had been prohibitive, an extra $800 a month that we simply couldn't afford. Or so I thought. I could have afforded it, she whispered. With the credit cards. I had the available credit. I chose not to use it for that. The words hit me like a physical blow. While my grandmother was spending her final months in a state facility that smelled like disinfectant and despair, my mother had been using my credit to buy rounds of drinks to strangers at bars. She could have had a private room, Mom continued. Better food, more attentive nurses. She could have died with dignity instead of... She trailed off, unable to finish. I felt something break inside my chest. Get out. Sarah, get out, now. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward. You let her suffer in that place while you were buying designer purses with my money. You let me feel guilty about not being able to afford better care while you knew we could afford it all along. I was scared. You were selfish. You were selfish and cruel and I stopped, realizing that other people in the treatment center were staring at us through the glass walls. I lowered my voice to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than screaming. You let her die badly so you could drink well. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door.
Sarah, wait. I turned back one last time. The contract stands. You'll pay back every penny you stole, and you'll complete the program. But don't expect forgiveness. Some things are unforgivable. I left her there, crying in that sterile room, and drove home with the windows down and the radio turned up loud enough to drown out my thoughts. But when I got home, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. My name was written on the outside in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated just 3 days before she died. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you know how proud I've always been of you. I know your mother has struggled, and I know that struggle has cost you more than it should, but I want you to know something about forgiveness." I sat on my couch, the same couch where my mother had passed out so many times, and read my grandmother's final words to me. Words about love and forgiveness and the difference between enabling someone and loving them. Words about how we honor the dead not by preserving their belongings, but by living lives they'd be proud of. And as I read, I realized that my grandmother had always known. She'd known about my mother's problems, about my struggles, about the impossible position I'd been put in. And somehow, even facing her own death, she'd been thinking about how to help me navigate the aftermath. The letter ended with a request that would change everything. If something happens to your mother, if she finally faces the consequences of her choices, I want you to remember that she's still my daughter and you're still hers. Love isn't the same thing as enabling. Sometimes love means letting someone fall so they can learn to stand up again. But it also means being there when they're ready to try. I folded the letter carefully and placed it next to my grandmother's sapphire necklace on my nightstand. Maybe revenge wasn't about punishment after all. Maybe it was about truth, about consequences, about finally making someone face the reality of what they'd done. And maybe, just maybe, it was about finding a way to love someone without letting them destroy you in the process. 2 months into my mother's treatment program, I got a call that changed everything. "Miss Collins, this is Dr. Martinez from Serenity Springs Treatment Center. I'm calling about your mother." My heart stopped. "Is she okay?" "She's fine physically, but she's asked me to call you. She wants to discuss something that came up in her therapy session today, and she'd like you to be present for the conversation." I'd been dreading this moment, the moment when the treatment center would tell me she was ready to come home, ready to face the world, ready to test whether our contract could survive in the real world. But when I arrived at the center that Saturday, my mother looked different than she had in weeks. She wasn't just sober, she was present, alert, like someone had turned up the brightness on her existence. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Martinez said as she led me to the same conference room where my mother and I had been meeting. "Your mother has been making significant progress, but today she shared something with the group that I think you need to hear." Mom was sitting at the table with a box I didn't recognize. She looked up when I entered, and I was startled by what I saw in her eyes. Not shame, not self-pity, something that looked almost like hope. "I need to show you something," she said without preamble, "something I've been hiding for even longer than the credit cards." She opened the box, and my breath caught in my throat. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of me from throughout my childhood and adolescence, carefully preserved and organized chronologically. But these weren't the photos from our family albums. These were different. Candid shots of me studying, working, sleeping, laughing with friends. You took these over the years? She said quietly. When I was drunk, when I was sober, when I was somewhere in between. Even on my worst days, I couldn't stop being proud of you. I picked up a photo from the top of the pile. It was me on graduation day from nursing school, but it wasn't the posed picture we had taken together. This was a shot of me walking across the stage, caught in a moment of pure joy as I received my diploma. You could see the pride on my face, the sense of accomplishment, the hope for the future. You were watching? I was always watching, even when you thought I wasn't there. Even when I was too drunk to tell you how proud I was watching. She pulled out another photo, this one of me visiting Grandma at the nursing home, holding her hand while she slept. I followed you there once, she admitted. I was too ashamed to come inside, too scared she'd see how far I'd fallen. But I wanted to see. I needed to know that you were taking good care of her. Mom, I know it doesn't excuse what I did. I know taking pictures doesn't make up for stealing from you, or lying to you, or letting Grandma suffer when I could have helped. But I need you to understand something. She pulled out a letter, not the kind you mail, but the kind you write when you're trying to figure out your own thoughts. I wrote this in group therapy yesterday. Dr. Martinez asked us to write a letter to the person we'd hurt most. I want to read it to you. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She cleared her throat and began to read. Dear Sarah, I've been trying to figure out when I stopped being your mother and started being a burden. Was it when your father left? Was it when I lost my job the third time? Or was it so gradual that we both just accepted it as normal? I used to tell myself that I was protecting you from the truth about how bad things were, that if you knew how much debt we were in, how close we always were to losing everything, how scared I was every single day, it would hurt you more than my lies did. But that wasn't protection. That was cowardice. I was supposed to be the adult. I was supposed to figure out how to pay the bills and keep us afloat, and make sure you could focus on building your future instead of constantly worrying about our present. Instead, I made you responsible for both of us while pretending I was still in charge. I stole your identity because I'd already stolen your childhood. I'd already made you the parent in our relationship, so taking your credit seemed like just one more way you were taking care of me. But children aren't supposed to take care of their parents. Children are supposed to be free to make their own mistakes, build their own lives, create their own futures. I stole all of that from you, one lie at a time. She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks, then continued. I can't give you back your childhood. I can't undo the nights you stayed home taking care of me instead of going out with friends. I can't restore the trust I broke or erase the years of lies I told. But I can stop. I can finally stop making you responsible for my life and start taking responsibility for yours. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even think I deserve it. But I want you to know that every choice I made, every lie I told, every dollar I stole, none of it was about not loving you. It was all about loving you so much that I was terrified of losing you and being so broken that I couldn't figure out how to love you without destroying you. I'm learning now. It's probably too late, but I'm learning. And if nothing else comes from this disaster I've made of our lives, maybe you can know that you saved me. Not by enabling me or covering for me or paying my debts, but by finally refusing to let me destroy both of us. You gave me consequences when no one else would. You gave me accountability when I'd spent years avoiding it. You gave me truth when I'd been living in lies for so long I'd forgotten what reality looked like. That's not what I wanted from you, but it's what I needed. And maybe if I do the work,
if I stay sober, if I rebuild my life from scratch, maybe someday I can be the mother you deserved all along, instead of the mother who needed you to be the adult. I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm finally learning how to love you without asking you to sacrifice yourself in the process. She folded the letter carefully and looked up at me. That's what I learned in therapy, she said. That love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's need. It's fear. It's everything except love. I sat there for a long moment, processing everything she'd said. The photos, the letter, the raw honesty in her voice. This wasn't the woman who tried to manipulate me with tears and promises. This was someone I barely recognized, someone who seemed to finally understand the full weight of what she'd done. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I finished a program, I get a job, I pay you back every penny exactly like we agreed, and I prove to you that I can be in your life without destroying it. And if you can't, then I'll face those consequences too." For the first time in 3 months, I felt something that might have been the beginning of hope.
1 year later, I was sitting in a real estate agent's office signing papers for my first house. It was a small place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with a kitchen that needed updating and a yard that was more weeds than grass. But it was mine. My name on the deed, my credit score slowly improving on the mortgage application, my key in the lock. My mother had been out of treatment for 8 months. True to her word, she'd gotten a job within 2 weeks of completing the program. Night custodian at the local college. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it meant she was working while I was sleeping, reducing the opportunities for conflict between us. She'd moved into a studio apartment 6 blocks from our old place, close enough to maintain our weekly check-ins, but far enough away that we both had space to breathe. Every Friday, she came to my apartment with her bank statements, her pay stubs, and her payment toward the debt she'd created. We were down to $11,000. At her current rate of payment, we'd be debt-free in 18 months. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the small things. Like the way she looked when she picked me up from work last Tuesday. My car was in the shop, and instead of making excuses or showing up late, she was waiting in the parking lot 15 minutes early, stone cold sober, with coffee from my favorite shop. Like the way she'd started asking about my day and actually listening to the answer, instead of just waiting for her turn to talk about her problems. Like the way she'd quietly started attending Al-Anon meetings to understand how her addiction had affected me, without me asking her to do it. The changes weren't dramatic. They weren't movie-worthy transformations that happened overnight with swelling music and tearful reconciliations. They were small, daily choices that added up to something that looked suspiciously like the mother I'd been hoping for my entire life. But the real test came 3 months ago, on the anniversary of Grandma's death. I'd been dreading that day for weeks. The first anniversary of losing someone is always hard, but this one carried the extra weight of everything that had happened since. I'd planned to spend the day alone, visiting her grave and maybe looking through the photo album she left behind. Instead, I woke up to find my mother sitting on my front steps at 7 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee and a small wrapped package. "I know you probably want to be alone today," she said when I opened the door, "but I have something that belongs to you." Inside the package was a small jewelry box I'd never seen before. Inside the box was a ring, Grandma's engagement ring, the one I thought was lost forever in the pawn shop. I went back to Murphy's 3 months ago. It took me 6 weeks to save up enough money, and I had to work extra shifts, but I got it back. I stared at the ring, this tiny piece of my grandmother's love story, and felt something crack open in my chest. "Why?" I whispered. "Because it was never mine to sell. Because it was part of your inheritance that I stole. And because—" She took a shaky breath. "Because Grandma would have wanted you to have it. And I finally figured out that what she would have wanted mattered more than what I needed in the moment." That was the day I realized that revenge, real revenge, isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. It's about forcing someone to face the truth about themselves and choose who they want to be going forward. My mother had faced that truth, and she'd chosen to become someone better.
We spent that anniversary together, visiting Grandma's grave and sharing stories about her that we'd never told each other before. Mom told me about the time Grandma had confronted her about her drinking years before I'd even realized there was a problem. About the ultimatums that had been ignored and the boundaries that had been crossed and the love that had persisted despite everything. She never gave up on me, Mom said as we sat by the headstone, even when she should have. Even when everyone else did, she kept believing I could be better than I was. She was like that, I agreed. She saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. I think she'd be proud of you, Mom, said quietly, for what you did, for how you handled everything. You saved my life, you know. I didn't save your life. You did. No, she shook her head. I was drowning and I was going to take you down with me. You threw me a rope, but you made me climb it myself. That's the only kind of rescue that actually works. Now, sitting in this real estate office, signing my name on documents that represented the future I'd built, despite everything that had tried to tear it down, I thought about consequences and redemption and the long, complicated path between revenge and forgiveness. I thought about my grandmother's sapphire necklace, which now hung from my rearview mirror, catching the light every time I drove to work. I thought about the credit cards we'd closed one by one as they were paid off, each zero balance a small victory in a war that had lasted too long. I thought about my mother, who would never be perfect, but who had finally learned the difference between loving someone and consuming them. And I thought about the house I was buying, not just as shelter, but as proof that you can build something beautiful from the ruins of betrayal, that you can face the worst in the people you love and still find a way forward. That revenge, when done right, isn't about destruction. It's about demanding that people become worthy of your love. The real estate agent handed me the keys, and I closed my fingers around them, feeling their weight. Tomorrow, I would start moving into my new life. And for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about what came next. Outside the office window, I could see my mother's car in the parking lot. She was waiting to drive me home, not because I'd asked her to, but because she'd offered, and because she'd learned that love sometimes means showing up even when it's inconvenient. I gathered up my copies of the paperwork and headed toward the door, toward my mother, toward the life we were both still learning how to build. After all, the best revenge is living well, and I was finally ready to start living. Thanks for listening to this incredible true revenge story. If you enjoyed hearing how Sarah got justice for her mother's betrayal and recovered her grandmother's precious necklace, smash that like button and subscribe for more shocking family revenge stories that will blow your mind. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? Would you have called the police immediately, or would you have given your mother a chance to make things right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories often inspire future episodes. Remember, the best revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about getting justice, setting boundaries, and building the life you deserve. Sarah's story proves that you can love someone without letting them destroy you. If you're dealing with addiction in your family or financial abuse from relatives, remember that it's not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. Resources and support links are in the description below. Like this video if you think Sarah handled this perfectly. Dislike if you think she should have called the police immediately.
Your engagement helps us bring you more incredible true revenge stories every week. This channel is growing thanks to amazing viewers like you who share, comment, and subscribe. See you in the comments, and remember, karma is real, but sometimes it needs a little help.